1917 swept over Russia like a storm, swift, relentless, unstoppable. While crowds in the streets tore down the old order and proclaimed a new one, few paused to think about those whose lives were woven from the delicate threads of tradition and centuries-old rules. Young women, raised in the quiet halls of the Smolny Institute, accustomed to curtsies, precise needlework, and the gentle rhythm of French novels, suddenly found themselves unwilling witnesses, sometimes even captives, of the tempests raging outside their classrooms. When the Bolsheviks moved into Smolny, turning it into the headquarters of the revolution, it never crossed their minds that other residents lived nearby, the young ladies of the Institute for Noble Maidens. Their world of discipline and grace collided with one of rifles, orders, and endless chaos. Everything blurred together, like a line from Lermontov, horses and men in a tangled heap. Only now, instead of horses and soldiers, it was commissars and refined young women, whose lives had been framed by propriety and polished manners. The institute itself was founded by Catherine II, an almost revolutionary act for its time. Girls, once prepared only to be wives and homemakers, were taught sciences, crafts, and even sports. The discipline was so strict that an outsider might mistake these delicate ladies for soldiers in training, not daughters of noble families. Yet, despite the rigid regime, they remained gentle, poised, and tactful. Smolny welcomed not only the elite but also girls from merchant families and orphans with nowhere else to go. Brought to the institute at 6 years old, they stayed until young adulthood, rarely touching the outside world. Their lives revolved around lessons, rules, and routines, while everything beyond the gates felt like another reality. Then the revolution crashed into this fragile, sheltered universe. The familiar order collapsed. Proper young ladies in dresses and white aprons suddenly found themselves neighbors to men with rifles, surrounded by shouts, commands, and the smell of gunpowder. Two worlds, never meant to meet, collided. From February 1917, Petrograd pulsed with the unstoppable energy of revolution. While the city's streets boiled with unrest, some prepared for decisive action, while others carried on with daily life. People rushed to shops for groceries or enjoyed an evening at the theater. But at Smolny, preparations for a great upheaval were underway. Here, in the heart of it all, the Soviet of People's Commissars strategized to rally soldiers and citizens to overthrow the provisional government. Smolny buzzed with tension. Lenin, who spent nearly 4 months within its walls, not only worked but lived there, consumed by plans for the revolution's defining moments. That summer, as most students left for vacation, the Bolsheviks took over the building. But the orphans, with nowhere to go, stayed behind. By tradition, they would have gone to summer estates in Sestroraisk or Oranienbaum, but in those turbulent times, no one dared leave the city. In July, when the Bolsheviks set up their headquarters, Smolny was divided. The Nikolaevsky wing went to the Soviet of People's Commissars, while the remaining students were moved to the Alexandrovsky wing. Within these walls, on the second floor, not just political history was being shaped, human fates were, too. The revolution, set to upend not just power but the very fabric of society, was just beginning. Orators in meeting rooms exhausted themselves with speeches, 7 or 8 hours at a stretch, with no sleep or rest. In those moments, when every step was critical, peace was a stranger to them. As October 25 approached, the planned storming of the Winter Palace, these men grew increasingly worn. Trotsky's wife, seeing him and Lenin, remarked they barely looked like themselves. Dark circles shadowed their eyes, their skin tinged with a sickly green. They slept on the floor or slumped over desks, lost in work, while outside, the building was ringed by soldiers with bayonets. The revolution spared no one, neither those driving it nor those caught in its grip. While world-shaping decisions were made in one corner of the city, ordinary life went on nearby, oblivious to the coming changes. Most people worried more about buying bread or feeding their children than political upheaval. Trams rattled along their usual routes, carrying passengers, including pickpockets who, like in any upheaval, thrived in the chaos of a crumbling order. Crime flourished, untamed. As Lenin himself put it, the old system was dead, but its corpse lingered, and society had to endure its rotting stench. Yet, in the midst of this, like flowers in a garden, the refined young ladies of Smolny carried on with their impeccable manners, living as if in another world. These two realities, two opposites, coexisted in the same space, unaware of how it would all end. Parents were advised not to send their daughters back to Smolny but to find other schools suited to the new era. The orphans, with nowhere to go, stayed, supported only by their teachers and matrons, who did their best to shield them from feeling abandoned. So, in one place, revolutionaries bent on changing the world lived alongside gentle young women in dresses, for whom that world still glowed like morning light. Until October 1917, the students of Smolny lived steps away from the revolutionaries, who mostly ignored their presence, or at least some did. For the girls, the events were alarming, but they stayed composed, quietly watching the world through their windows as revolutionary fervor stormed the halls. One day, the commandant, Pavel Maltsev, strolling through Smolny's grounds, was stunned to realize he wasn't alone. In the heart of the revolution, the bourgeois element persisted. He was particularly outraged by the presence of Madame Golitsina, a class matron with noble titles and ties to the imperial family, whose office sat near the Soviets' meeting rooms. Maltsev reported to his superiors that among the revolutionary forces were people out of place. Those alien elements with the pristine dresses and polished appearances didn't fit the vision of the new world. The response was swift. The students and their matron were ordered to leave, their belongings removed. But soon, a new order came. Some furniture could stay. Chairs, tables, cabinets, and, most importantly, proper beds with mattresses were left on the third floor. The revolutionaries were shocked that these delicate ladies slept on hard iron beds. Few realized the institute wasn't a place of luxury but of Spartan conditions, thin sheets over rigid frames, far from the comfort the commissars imagined. Their attempt to improve things was more than a little ironic. Princess Vera Golitsina, who had led Smolny since 1915, couldn't stand by as the institute she cherished was torn apart. She wrote complaints to various authorities, distressed that her students were being evicted, their belongings taken, and the building, she feared, would soon be fully claimed by the Bolsheviks. Her worry wasn't just about losing control but stemmed from her belief that this chaos was temporary, that the old order would soon return. She kept writing to ministries, hoping for restoration. But her pleas went unanswered. The old ministries were gone, and new ones hadn't yet formed. The girls watched as their usual walking paths, once peaceful, filled with armed men and armored vehicles. They likely didn't grasp that the life they knew was already over. Golitsina's health declined, and she considered leaving teaching, but stayed for her students. When ordered to leave Smolny, she took her daughters and a small group of girls to Novokirkisk. She couldn't take everyone, unsure of what her own future held. The youngest students and their caretakers stayed behind, watching their once stable world crumble day by day. The commandant was tasked with clearing the building of alien elements, but he didn't cast the girls out into the cold October streets. Instead, they were to be sent to the Koseninsky Institute, another school for noble maidens. Its leadership refused to take them, claiming they could barely manage their own students. Maltsev, a blunt and uncompromising man, didn't hesitate. He threatened, "We'll invite you for a talk at Smolny." That was enough to settle the matter instantly. The girls were moved to Koseninsky, but their stay was brief. In 1918, the last class of noble maidens graduated. The remaining students were sent to the Nikolaevsky orphanage. Koseninsky itself was soon taken over by trade unions, its elegant halls reborn as the Palace of Labor. Smolny, meanwhile, remained significant after the revolution. During the Great Patriotic War, it was carefully protected, draped in camouflage netting. After the Soviet government moved to Moscow in 1918, Smolny became a seat of local power. Today, it's both a museum and the governor's residence in St. Petersburg. The fates of the students were no less dramatic. After 2 years in Novokirkisk, some, still in their studies, moved to Serbia. There, the Institute for Noble Maidens was revived by General Dukhanen's widow, lasting until 1932. At first glance, these young women, with their polished manners, seemed untouched by hardship. But their lives at Smolny were grueling: 12 years without family, seeing loved ones just once a year, endless lessons, rigid schedules, and monotonous days rolling on with iron certainty. They weren't just trained to be model wives and mothers but molded into a new kind of enlightened woman, demanded to show resilience, willpower, and sacrifice they often didn't know they possessed. The story of Smolny and its students mirrors Russia itself. a nation yanked from its familiar ways and thrust into a storm of change. Girls who, just yesterday, lived among lessons, prayers, and dance classes found themselves neighbors to revolutionaries, weapons, and chaos. Some left, others stayed, caught in the whirlwind of a new life. Each, in her own way, bore witness to the end of one era and the birth of another. Now, a question for you, friends. Do you think these noble maidens could hold on to their ideals in a world where their old order was crumbling? Or did the revolution change their hearts as much as it changed the country? Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like to support my work, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more tales of forgotten lives and hidden chapters of history.